Turkey's election is a warning about Trump. The totalitarian phenomenon, the French philosopher Jean-François Revel once noted, is not to be understood without making an allowance for the thesis that some important part of every society consists of people who actively want tyranny, either to exercise it themselves or, much more mysteriously, to submit to it. It's an observation that should help guide our thinking about the re-election this week of Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. And it should serve as a warning about other places, including the Republican Party, where autocratic leaders, seemingly incompetent in many respects, are returning to power through democratic means. That's not quite the way Erdogan's close but comfortable victory in Sunday's runoff over the former civil servant Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is being described in many analyses. The president, they say, has spent 20 years in power tilting every conceivable scale in his favor. Erdogan has used regulatory means and abused the criminal justice system to effectively control the news media. He has exercised his presidential power to deliver subsidies, tax cuts, cheap loans and other handouts to favored constituencies. He has sought to criminalize an opposition party on specious grounds of links to terrorist groups. In December, a Turkish court effectively barred Erdogan's most serious prospective rival, Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu of Istanbul, from politics by sentencing him to prison on charges of insulting public officials. Then, too, Kılıçdaroğlu was widely seen as a colorless and inept politician, promising a return to a status quo ante that many Turks remember, with no fondness, as a time of regular economic crises and a kind of repressive secularism. All of this is true, as far as it goes, and it helps underscore the worldwide phenomenon of what Fareed Zakaria aptly calls free and unfair elections. But it doesn't go far enough. Turkey under Erdogan is in a dreadful state and has been for a long time. Inflation last year hit 85% and is still running north of 40%, thanks to Erdogan's insistence on cutting interest rates in the teeth of rising prices. He has used a series of show trials, some based in fact, others pure fantasy, to eviscerate civil freedoms. February's earthquakes, which took an estimated 50,000 lives and injured twice as many, were badly handled by the government and exposed the corruption of a system that cared more for patronage networks than for well-built buildings. Under normal political expectations, Erdogan should have paid the political price with a crushing electoral defeat. Not only did he survive, he increased his vote share in some of the towns worst hit by, and most neglected after, the earthquakes. "We love him," explained a resident quoted in The Economist. "For the call to prayer, for our homes, for our headscarves." That last line is telling, and not just because it gets to the importance of Erdogan's Islamism as the secret of his success. It's a rebuke to James Carville's parochially American slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." Actually, no, it's also God, tradition, values, identity, culture and the resentments that go with each. Only a denuded secular imagination fails to notice that there are things people care about more than their paychecks. There is also the matter of power. The classically liberal political tradition is based on the suspicion of power. The illiberal tradition is based on the exaltation of it. Erdogan, as the tribune of the Turkish everyman, built himself an aesthetically grotesque, 1,100-room presidential palace for $615 million. Far from scandalizing his supporters, it seems to have delighted them. In it, they see not a sign of extravagance or waste, but the importance of the man and the movement to which they attach themselves and submit. All this is a reminder that political signals are often transmitted at frequencies that liberal ears have trouble hearing, much less decoding. To wonder how Erdogan could possibly be re-elected after so thoroughly wrecking his country's economy and its institutions is akin to wondering how Vladimir Putin appears to retain considerable domestic support in the wake of his Ukraine debacle. Maybe what some critical mass of ordinary Russians want, at least at some subconscious level, isn't an easy victory. It's a unifying ordeal. Which brings us to another would-be strongman in his palace in Palm Beach. In November, I was sure that Donald Trump was, as I wrote, finally finished. How could any but his most slavish followers continue to support him after he had once again cost Republicans the Senate? Wouldn't this latest proof of losing be the last straw for devotees who had been promised so much winning? Silly me. The Trump movement isn't built on the prospect of winning. It's built on a sense of belonging, of being heard and seen, of being a thorn in the side to those you sense despise you and whom you despise in turn, of submission for the sake of representation. All the rest, victory or defeat, prosperity or misery, is details. Erdogan defied expectation because he understood this. He won't be the last populist leader to do so. Turkey's election is a warning about Trump. The totalitarian phenomenon, the French philosopher Jean-François Revel once noted, is not to be understood without making an allowance for the thesis that some important part of every society consists of people who actively want tyranny, either to exercise it themselves or, much more mysteriously, to submit to it. It's an observation that should help guide our thinking about the re-election this week of Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Sacramento's war on Skittles. California progressives are using phony scientific theories to target processed food ingredients. Progressives aren't satisfied with banning internal combustion engines, gas stoves, and plastic straws. They want to take away your Skittles, jelly beans, and red velvet cupcakes too. California's Assembly this month passed legislation to ban 5 chemicals: BVO, potassium bromate, propylparaben, red dye number 3, and titanium dioxide, that are commonly found in sweets and processed foods. A similar bill is moving through New York's legislature. Their proponents suggest these food additives may cause cancer. That doesn't tell you much considering today's progressives say the same for just about everything. California law requires furniture, alcoholic beverages, cell phones, and suitcases, among other things, to bear labels warning they may contain cancer-causing chemicals. There's scant evidence to support these claims, but that's beside the point, which is to enrich trial lawyers. In case you haven't noticed, the modern left increasingly marshals science to advance its political goals. Here, Democrats are using phony scientific theories to target food ingredients that make processed foods tastier and more visually appealing. A rule of thumb is that progressives seek to enforce by federal regulation what they can't pass through Congress. When they fail at both, they seek to impose their will through blue state legislatures. The campaign against Skittles is a case in point. Left-wing groups have unsuccessfully lobbied the Food and Drug Administration to ban the aforementioned chemicals that have been found in foods since the 1960s. The FDA permits food additives that enhance color, texture, and taste as long as they are generally recognized as safe. If new evidence suggests otherwise, the agency may re-evaluate ingredients, as it did for titanium dioxide after the European Union banned the chemical in 2022. Titanium dioxide, which is often found in candy as well as a variety of processed foods such as shredded cheddar cheese, is used to brighten colors and